Hello everyone and welcome to our latest webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rob Newton. I'm delighted to be joined today by Richard Payne, Head of Technology at Holdan, as we discuss the new GH5 camera from Panasonic. For anyone who hasn't heard or come across Richard before, he's worked in video and media production for over 30 years, so he's got lots of experience. He's been a cameraman, editor, director, producer, so a good feel for the whole industry really, and worked with lots of high-profile companies. So it's good to have him here and for him to share his knowledge and experience, particularly on this particular camera.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Right, so I'd like to tell you quite a bit of detail about the GH5, and I have been using it for a couple of weeks. So although this is quite a technical presentation, I'll hopefully pepper it with some of my own feedback from having used the camera. Typically, ever since I've had the camera, the weather's been appalling, so I'm really looking forward to some good weather with this. Right, so as you can see the picture here, this is the GH5 with the audio add-on unit. There'll be a little more detail on that later, but this unit allows you to plug in XLR balanced microphones, and you've got phantom power. And unlike the Yagi for the GH4, this will take power from the camera. And there's no wiring. All the connections done through the hot shoe. So as I say, I'll cover that in a bit more detail later, but that's what the camera is. Obviously it's detachable. So we'll move on to slide 1. So this camera is, you mustn't forget, it's a stills camera as well as being a video camera. I always think of it just as a video camera, but it's got a new sensor with 20.3 megapixels, so it can take very good quality stills as well as very high quality video as well. And its compact size means it appeals to people who are very much sort of out and about, because it's a lot smaller than Canon equivalents. Obviously it has got a smaller sensor as well, and we'll cover some detail on that later on in the presentation. But for videographers, and that's who I think the target market is for, it really is quite innovative. They have thrown the kitchen sink at features on this camera, so we'll go through them. So as I said, it's got this new 20.3 megapixel sensor. Now it hasn't got a low pass filter. The previous GH4 did have a low pass filter. It has got a good infrared filter, which cuts out a huge majority of infrared light, so the performance is very good. Now some people might worry that the loss of the low pass filter is going to create more aliasing, but I don't think that's the case, because they're doing some very clever debayering to get rid of that disadvantage. The other new feature is 4K 60p. So it can record 4K, that's UHD at 60 frames a second. There's no limit to the recording time, so you can record till you fill up the cards. And as you'll see, there are now 2 SD card slots, so you can relay record. So as soon as it's filled one card, you switch automatically to the second to get a seamless join. So the new autofocus system is considerably faster than previous generation with the GH4, and it's also now freeze-proof. It was always splash-proof, the GH4, but now it will go down to minus 10 degrees. So if you're working in rather extreme conditions, you'll find that the LCD back screen doesn't stop working as has done with previous incarnations. Also, they've added Bluetooth. So Bluetooth is a useful technology because you can pair it to your phone much more quickly than you could with just Wi-Fi. You don't have to go through passwords and things. And there's 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, large HDMI. We'll go over these in a bit more detail. So move on. So this is what it looks like. The most important thing will probably be for people who've had a GH4 is it exactly the same size and form factor? And it isn't. It's about 10% bigger. So it won't fit in any cages, any previous things you've had which are tight fitted around the GH4, but it is able to, it is a similar size. It is heavier. The first thing you'll notice when you pick it up is it's a good 25–30% heavier than the GH4. And also there's no flash unit, whereas you had the flash. They've obviously packed this with a little more brain power and more electronics because there's no room for a flash. So if you need to use flash, it will have to be external. So as you can see, there's a Type A HDMI socket, and this is a huge advantage for many people. The flimsy sort of micro HDMI is one of the first points of failure, but also it's very easy to pull out the HDMI when you're monitoring when it's a micro one. This is not only full size, but you might be able to see on the picture there's two screws, and it comes in a box with a locking mechanism, so you can lock the HDMI cable in. So that's a nice new feature. And also you can see from here there is a USB 3.1 socket. We've got headphone and mic inputs, and there's also a new joystick which wasn't present on the GH4, so yet another method of control. In fact, with the mapping of function buttons, you can map 20 different features to function buttons, which is a lot more than you could with the GH4 for fast shooting. So here's that XLR adapter. This will cost about £300 on top of the cost of the camera. And as you can see, we've got phantom power, full audio control left and right with a sort of physical pot, and a cold shoe on top, so you can mount a microphone through that adapter. I would have preferred to have a mic holder on the side of this, but that obviously, because of a design, they haven't been able to add that, so you need to use a cold shoe for mounting a rifle mic or whatever you want on top of this XLR unit. I've even mounted recorders and things. Because this unit has the connections directly on the bottom for that hot shoe, you can't have this separate. It has to be mounted on the camera. So if you're going to mount a monitor or something on top, it has to go on top of this. But the mounting is very secure. It's got a lockable mechanism, so it shouldn't cause any problems. One of the important things, if you're shooting MOV format, you can record sound at up to 96 kilohertz 24 bits. So there's a higher audio recording mode than on previously any camera like this that I've come across. Here's some more detail on how the GH5 compares to the GH4. So I'm not going to go read all this out, but you can see there's a lot of big advantages over the GH4. One of the things which you haven't got is the Yagi, which the add-on unit for the GH4, which gave it quad SDI out to give 4K out. This doesn't do that, but the full-size HDMI 2.1 output does mean that with a separate HDMI to SDI converter, you could get these flexible outputs from the camera. It doesn't have the timecode in that the Yagi had, but a lot of people found the Yagi was a little bit unwieldy to work with because it needed external power. So I think the decision to choose the XLR box on top is a wise one, especially as it's self-powered from the camera. So we'll go through a couple of the other features, but one of the headline things for me is instead of the 96 frames a second full HD mode you had on GH4, we've now got 180 frames a second slow-mo. And I think it's considerably better quality as well than we had with the 96 frames per second on the GH4. And I've shot a fair bit in slow-mo, and it's looking lovely. Right. So a bit more about the sensor. There's a faster readout, a 1.66 times faster readout of the sensor, so we have less rolling shutter. So you get a much, this is much improved when you've got fast motion or you're using faster shutter speeds. So that rolling shutter problem which you get with CMOS, with this sort of CMOS camera, is much less than anything I've seen remotely in the area. So they're able to do this because they've got a new processor, a new Venus engine inside. They've given this so much more processor power, so it's 1.3 times a faster processor power than you had with the GH4, and that's why it's capable of 60p 4K, of doing 422 10-bit recording. So by packing it with processor grunt, it's capable of doing an awful lot more. So we'll see how that affects some of the other features as we go on. Right, this is why I'm less worried about the removal of the low pass filter, because it's got this multi-pixel luminance generation. It's reading a lot more pixels to debayer, to give me more subtle luminance information, which means you don't get some of the aliasing problems that you can have when you're just reading a 2x2 pixel area. So you get less stepping on diagonal lines, you get more subtle, more naturalistic edges. So the edges are much better reproduced with this camera, and that's down to using that extra processor grunt to do more intelligent detail processing. So this is one of those things that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and you know, the proof is in the pictures. You might not be able to see on the next slide the subtlety of this, but when you look at some of the pictures coming out of the GH5, and there's lots of stuff on Vimeo and YouTube at the moment, just have a look at the edges. I think you'll find that they're much better reproduced than previous generation. And same thing for detail generally. That removal of the low pass filter means we've got the ability to pull out all that detail when we want to. But as I say, it doesn't seem to be causing aliasing issues, and I have pointed it at a circular resolution chart, and the aliasing is low. It's certainly acceptable. The other new feature in the new processing grunt is better color control. I should have added an U to that color, sorry about that. So the color control is, for me, significantly better when you've got low light and highlight situations. You don't get the sort of washed out color that you can get in both extreme highlights and low lights. That the color seems to be much more naturally represented across the image, which is particularly good for skin tones. But you'll find even if the image is slightly overexposed or underexposed, the colors are still there and still very clear, and so you can pull it out with a bit of tweaking in post-production. And again, this color control gives you more subtlety across the whole image, and married to the 422 10-bit output of the camera, or recording of the camera, you've got an awful lot more color capability, subtler colors that can be pushed further in grading. Noise reduction as well. Again, I'm not sure how this will come out over the web, but basically the noise reduction is so much more sophisticated that it holds so much more of the detail. So even at high ISO shooting with a lot of noise reduction, you're still getting pictures that don't look like you've smeared Vaseline on the lens or they're made out of Lego bricks. So the very high ISO, and we're talking, you know, 6,400 or even pushing it further than that, you're getting much cleaner images than we had before. I'm certainly happy up to 3,200 to shoot sort of everyday shooting, because the noise reduction is so good. The native ISO of the camera, by the way, is 400. So another major feature, as I said, they have rather thrown the kitchen sink at this, is in-camera image stabilization. They basically move the sensor in the camera using a gyro sensor to detect how the camera is moving, and so the sensor has got 5-axis image stabilization. So it's not just up, down, left and right, it actually rocks and rolls a little bit in order to give us that extra axis. And this means, because it's in the body, we don't have to rely on lenses which have image stabilization. We can use prime lenses and still get a really good degree of stabilization. It makes a terrific difference when shooting handheld with prime lenses. So they talk about this as 5 stops, but of course that's only really relates to still picture shooting. But it certainly means that, you know, all my handheld stuff is a hell of a lot smoother than it was before. And whether you consider it gimbal-like, I don't think it quite goes that far, but it is almost magical when you use it in conjunction with the Lumix lenses, which have built-in image stabilization. So you've got a dual stabilization mode. So it marries the stabilization from the lens to the sensor stabilization, giving it considerably more ability to stabilize. And there's even in video shooting a little electronic stabilization which you can choose to add as well. So because this crops slightly, it's something which comes into the image a little bit more, and so you might not want to use it in every situation, but the combination means you really can get pretty rock solid handheld shots. As I say, the dual stabilization is only available with the Panasonic Lumix lenses. The other major feature is these recording modes. So we have this 4K at 60p, 50p, 60p, so you can do smooth 4K shooting. You aren't just limited to 25 sort of filmic mode. You can use it for filming sport or fast action. And you can also do off-speed recording and slow motion in 4K by shooting 4K 50p, 60p and reducing it down to 25p and afterwards. So variable frame rate and this ability to do 60p, but the 60p is 420 8-bit recording. So it's very good quality at 150 megabits a second, but it is 420 8-bit. The real magical thing for me is the 422 10-bit internal recording, which we get with the GH4. And this is possibly for me the biggest draw of that they've added to this camera, and it's something which we've been wanting for ages. Ironically, at the moment the 422 10-bit is only in 4K, it's not in HD. They are planning a firmware update very quickly after the camera comes out in March to give it 422 10-bit HD recording as well. So that will be a firmware update which is coming at, they say, NAB time, so pretty soon. So also, as if 422 10-bit internal recording wasn't enough, there'll be in the summer a firmware upgrade to give us 400 megabits a second all intra recording, so not IBP frame. Every single frame will be recorded cleanly, 422 10-bit all intra 400 megabit mode, and this will be fairly astonishing in such a small form factor camera. This is giving us sort of ProRes HQ type quality onto an SD card. It's not ProRes HQ, it's a MPEG-4 based codec, but it's all intra, so every frame's recorded so you won't get motion problems. You'll have to use special cards for these. Obviously, to record at 400 megabits a second, you'll need the very latest cards, and Panasonic are already releasing cards capable of these sort of data rates. You won't be able to do this on bog standard cards. So as you can see, it says a video grade class 60 SD card.
Okay. Rob's just got a question here. Yeah. Is 4K 60 10-bit 422 possible in future upgrades?
It certainly hasn't been talked about, so I don't believe it is. I think it would just take a bit too much processor power. I mean, never say never, but I think if they thought they could do that, they would have put it on the roadmap. Yeah, so we've got a roadmap which goes up to the summer, which is giving us the 400 megabit, but I think 4K 60p, that would be a step too far. However, the camera will output 4K 60p 10-bit through the HDMI, so you could use an external recorder like the Atomos Inferno if that was a feature you definitely needed. Another feature of the GH5 is its global use. So you can switch frequency between 50 Hertz and 59, 94, and if 24 Hertz if you want to shoot in DCI 4K. So there's quite a few other features on here. The 422 10-bit live recording and live output, the HDMI Type A. This is just sort of a recap of some of these features. I stole this presentation from Panasonic, so basically, sorry for repeating myself, but some of these features are absolutely amazing. I'm going to go into more detail on the high-res anamorphic in a minute. Right, so this is talking about the recording formats, and you can see from this table that not all the formats are available straight away, but it has a huge amount more format potential than you had with the GH4. So that the headline ones are 422 10-bit 4K now, 422 10-bit HD recording at NAB, sort of April time, and in the summer we're getting this intra 422 10-bit every frame recorded 400 megabit mode. And don't forget, for people shooting using QuickTime, if you're using the MOV format and you use the add-on XLR adapter box, you've got the ability to do 96 kilohertz 24-bit audio as well. So for the audio files out there, you know, very, very high quality capture. For anyone who's not convinced about the 422 10-bit, basically the ability to record 422 10-bit in camera means that we can push the images much further in grading. We've got more subtlety, more detail captured in the color information, which means we can push it, we can give it a much more interesting grade. You can make skies bluer without getting the sort of characteristic blockiness you can get when you push 8-bit footage too far. You can also save footage which is a little overexposed or a little underexposed. It's the sophistication will let us use the footage in more complex sort of production workflows as well. So letting you use this for proper television and broadcast, not just for Vimeo and YouTube. So there's a little bit more about the color sampling, which just shows that not only have we got the 422 giving us more color pixels, so we get a much more... Something's just fallen off the back of the TV here. I'm glad this isn't on camera. So we've got that subtlety which we can use to... There's a luminance level generations are more subtle as well. We've got 1024, a 0 to 1024 as one of the luminance choices when you're shooting 10 bits, so you can get more color detail. So as I say, the output is, whereas with the GH4, if you were outputting 10-bit 422, it couldn't do simultaneous recording. The GH5 can do simultaneous recording while outputting through the HDMI 422 10-bit, so much more sophisticated. And again, that's down to that extra brain power they put in it. As I say, the HDMI, full-size HDMI, comes with a cable lock in the box, this screw-in unit to make sure that cable isn't going anywhere. There's another factor with the GH4. If you accidentally pulled out the HDMI while it was recording, it would stop recording, and this annoyed a lot of shooters who are using it in professional environments. That doesn't happen anymore, so even if you did manage to yank the cable out, it carries on recording. That's a case of Panasonic listening to some of the criticism of the previous model. Right, so through the HDMI we have got timecode output and record control. So on something like an Atomos recorder, it will trigger it if you press record on the camera through that record control, and the timecode is recorded. But unlike the Yagi, you can't put timecode into the unit like you could with the GH4 on the Yagi. So there's more sophisticated knee controls, so we can set our luminance levels more subtly. So something which traditional broadcast cameramen will be used to playing with. And there's a new color mode, a new gamma mode in the camera, a new sort of picture profile called 709 like to give us a closer to sort of standard video camera performance. If you're shooting Vlog and the camera is capable of a Vlog just like the GH4, but you do have to buy an optional, it's an extra cost. I think it's about £70 or so Vlog license for it. But now you can load, I think it's about 4 lookup tables into the camera, so you're capable of monitoring, so shooting Vlog, but actually monitoring the graded result through the lookup table you've loaded into the camera. So you've got a standard profile which just shows you the D-log, but you can also put your own lookup tables in. So if you're trying to do a lighting to create a certain look, you can have your lookup table in there, so as you're monitoring you see exactly what it's going to look like after the grade. And it can send that lookup table through the HDMI output as well. This is something that's quite unusual. In fact, I don't think there's any camera in this price point which does anything like this. So that's the new log assist and lookup table adding on the GH5.
Are we able to record 10-bit 4K to one card and 1080 or 720 proxy to the second card?
And you can do this on a camera like the UX180, the camcorder from Panasonic, or the domestic one, the HDX1, but you can't do that on the GH5. And they told me it's because there's only one codec. The reason an engineer once told me the reason they can do this dual codec recording on a lot of the Panasonic cameras actually comes from the 3D days where they were doing dual codec recording. So they had chips capable of doing 2 codecs simultaneously, and they've changed this, as nobody wants 3D anymore, as we all know. It's 3D's dead, to give us dual codec, but this camera isn't capable of that. It hasn't got the chip necessary. So the functions you get from the dual cards are either relay record, where it finishes one and moves straight onto the other, or you can do a different record mode where it will do video to one card and time-lapse or stills to the second card. So there is some configuration, but not proxy recording, I'm afraid. Okay. Right. Another feature which will come in the summer with a firmware upgrade is hybrid log gamma, or HDR, output through the HDMI. So because the camera is capable of recording 12 or 13 stops of range, we're able to shoot HDR on it, especially if you're in the log mode. but with this update we'll be able to play HDR images straight from the camera through HDMI. Anamorphic, this is a particular favourite of mine.
Yes.
It's anamorphic lenses. Because we're also a distributor for SLR Magic, I have to say I've got a vested interest in this, but I've started to love shooting with anamorphic lenses. I think it's a great way of making your work stand out from everybody else's for a start, because it's an aspect ratio which is just much more interesting and much more cinematic, and it's a challenge to frame things differently for anamorphic. And one of the big factors, the GH5 can now do anamorphic shooting at 3328 by 2496 pixels. So it's different. It's a different format to the standard UHD, but it's still recording as much information as you do with UHD. So if you're using a 2x anamorphic lens, like the Micro Four Thirds SLR Magic ones, which we do, you're able to shoot with this higher resolution and then de-squeeze the images afterwards and get fantastic looking widescreen high resolution images. Now, if this wasn't enough, there is a new mode which is coming in the summer, a high resolution anamorphic mode. And if anybody's seen the headline features that there'll be a 6K anamorphic mode on the GH5, that's when it's due, in summer 2017. Now 6K it doesn't sound that much greater than 4K, but it's a big change in the resolution. We're able to, we're talking every still from it would be 18 megapixels. So this 6K mode wouldn't be able to be recorded using standard compression. So this 6K mode will be H.265 compressed, not H.264. Now I believe it will be the only H.265 recording mode on the camera, but this extra resolution, it is recorded in 4:3 aspect ratio using much more of the sensor. And incidentally, something I may not have mentioned is the sensor in the GH5 doesn't crop when you're shooting video like it did with the GH4, so you still get the maximum width all the time when you're shooting with it. And with the GH5, when we get this high res mode, we'll be using that extra vertical resolution in the sensor, and then we'll be converting that using the anamorphic lenses into horizontal resolution to give these incredibly high detail pictures. And nothing out there anywhere near this price point. I think the only thing which will have a higher res anamorphic mode will probably be the new red sensor, the helium sensor. So we're talking, you know, camera costing 10 times as much, maybe not 10 times, maybe 20 times. How much is a helium censored red? Anyway, so this 6K anamorphic mode will come in the summer, but do be aware, H.265, not every editing program will be able to edit it out of the box. It's going to be interesting to see how the support goes for these modes. In fact, while I'm talking about editing support, the 10-bit 422 mode, which is currently available on the GH5, is only supported by Final Cut Pro 10, and I've seen it work with Adobe Premiere on a PC but not on a Mac. Have problems on a Mac with Adobe Premiere. Grass Valley Edius is absolutely happy editing this footage, but I think there are problems with Avid at the moment. So the NLE manufacturers will have to do an update to make sure this codec's available across the board. So that's the anamorphic mode coming in the summer. Right, so focus transition is another nice feature. This is available on some of the Panasonic camcorders now. This effectively lets you do a focus pull using touchscreen if you want to. So you can touch the tree and touch the tower and it will pull focus from one to the other. And it will record this, and you can change the speed of the focus pull as well. So it's an automated focus puller. Sorry for any focus pullers out there, you're not needed. Slow motion, 4K and full HD. As I said, the headline feature is we can do 180 frames a second slow-mo in HD, but because we're now capable of 60 frames a second in 4K, there's a variable frame rate mode which lets you shoot up to 2.5 times slow-mo if you shoot 60p and play it back at 24 frames a second. So you can get good slow-mo in 4K, but you can get better slow-mo in HD. And that 180 frames a second, it doesn't look too over-compressed. I think there is a bit more aliasing than you get when you're shooting normal HD on this, but I think the images are looking exceptionally good. And have a look at a couple of the slow motion slow motion shots on YouTube after this if you're interested in seeing that. But certainly fantastic for sports analysis, but also 180 frames is getting up to serious slow-mo territory for any fast action stuff. It also usefully suggests what shutter speed you should be using when you're shooting at high frame rates. It suggests you're using 200th of a second when you're doing 180 frames a second, for instance. You can change this, but it gives you what it thinks would be a good choice of shutter speed for getting the best looking slow-mo. Don't forget, if you're shooting under things like fluorescent light, like we've got in this room, that will flicker like hell. So much better for slow-mo, because you need that extra light in doing outdoors, or LED lights don't tend to have the same flicker that you get from fluorescence. Tungsten can cause problems as well. So best to be used outdoors. Right, other features, there's new control panels which make it a lot easier to access video modes very, very quickly, and waveform monitor, which is something I've really wanted for ages on a small camera like this. I use the waveform monitor all the time for setting my exposure. It has got a vector scope as well, and it has got a histogram, but the waveform is the one that I want to use all the time. And as I said, the luminance level, if you're in 10-bit color mode, can be set to any of these settings, 0 to 1023 or 64 to 940. So you can limit your luminance level, or you can expand it to pull more luminance information out in post later. Right, so rather subtle adjustments like pedestal, synchro scan for filming, CRT screens to avoid that flicker with difficult lighting situations. You've got dual zebras now, so you can set a zebra for skin tones and another one for overexposure. A lot of these features were already available on the GH4. There's an internal microphone, which of course anybody who is serious about sound wouldn't use, but in an emergency it's good, and they've actually put some noise cancellation on it. So if you're using a lens which has motors in for doing the image stabilization, it will subtract that noise from the recording before it's, or from the sound before it's recorded. So you can get better sound than you should out of the built-in microphone. So this new autofocus system, again, by putting a bigger brain in the GH5, we're able to get much better autofocus, and the autofocus is much more sophisticated in the GH5, giving us the ability to use it in fast motion, in sort of focus tracking, in scenes that wouldn't have worked before, and it's leveraging this brain power in order to make the autofocus better. So it is significantly faster with 0.05 of a second, as opposed to 0.07 of a second with the GH4. And that might look like a very small number, but it makes a big difference in terms of the speed, the sync and autofocus. So the focus tracking is more sophisticated too. And one of the big features this has over the previous model is a larger number of autofocus points. So we've got 225 focus points. I can't remember how many were on the GH4, but it was certainly less than 225. And it gives us a subtlety and also the ability to use this custom multi-point selector. This is really good if you've got a locked off camera and you don't want somebody standing up in the audience to suddenly take focus away from what's on the stage. You can just tell it to only touch the pixels at the top of the screen, and then it will look at autofocus from that point of view. This is also useful for in-car shooting, where you can paint an area in focus terms that it will just ignore, rather than using an autofocus over the whole scene. So you can customize the autofocus in ways that haven't been seen before with things like this. So you're able to give more subtlety depending on whether you're tracking images, moving fast stuff, or slow moving things. So again, it's just that extra creative control you get out of the autofocus. Okay, so other features, again, most of these are already available. So low light autofocus is significantly better than it was on the GH4. I really like the face and eye detection. The fact it doesn't just do face detection, but you can choose the left or the right eye if you're doing really shallow depth of field stuff is fantastic. So if you're using a 2.8 or a faster lens, you can choose which eye you want in focus. And focus peaking is also very good and very useful for a camera like this. There is a focus enlargement as well. I'm afraid one thing it doesn't do is let you do the manual focus enlargement at the same time as recording. It stops this when you start recording, so sorry about that, but apparently it's just one of the limitations of how they've done the system for doing the focus enlarging. The viewfinder on this camera is quite astonishingly good. It is 3.6, so it's 3.6 million pixel OLED viewfinder, and it's much higher resolution than the previous camera. The rear monitor is not such a huge increase in resolution over the previous, but it is an increase and it's bigger. So the important thing is it's a larger rear screen, which allows you to have more menu functions on it simultaneously, and just obviously bigger's better. But the real fantastic thing about this camera is the viewfinder. This OLED viewfinder is pin sharp with that huge 3 million pixels. It is definitely the best in class. So there's a little more detail about that now. So I'm going to move on to the GH4. There we go, was 2.3 million. So we've gone from 2.3 to 3.6 million. Right, so as I said, shoot down to -10 degrees, so considerably more robust. And you can feel that when you pick up the camera. You can actually feel that extra build quality in it. And also the new Lumix lenses which are coming out are weather sealed as well, so the new generation will have better weather sealing, really letting you use this in extreme conditions. So there's some other, this is the menu features that will give you more lines per page, so you can get to menu features much more quickly and easily. There's also a custom menu button, so you can put just the features you use frequently on the menu. So this is what we talked about earlier on with the relay recording or the backup recording. So we can either record exactly the same to both cards, or we can record from one to the other and then hot swap them. So you could do unlimited recording. By the way, there's no limit to recording this camera. You don't need to get an R version of this camera. It will do, even in European model, will do unlimited recording. So you don't have that 30-minute cutoff, and there's no overheating that I've seen when filming. I have left it running for an hour. There was no overheating, no problem, even at 60 frames 4K. The allocation recording lets you choose different things to go onto different cards. So this is just talking about the remote control. One of the really nice things about this, obviously it's great, so you can be shooting stills and sending them straight to your smartphone, so you can Twitter them or Instagram them or Facebook if any of those things ever take off. But this will let you have full remote control, even seeing an image from the GH5, so it gives you the full remote control capability from a smartphone, and the Bluetooth means you don't have to muck about with passwords each time. Also, you can copy settings from one camera to another, which for multi-camera shoots is fantastic. It means that if you've got one camera set up and then someone comes along and fiddles with your camera, then you can immediately put your settings back to how they were, or copy favorite settings from camera to camera depending on the situation. So this is a really nice feature. So
yeah, we've got one question from Rob. So 4K anamorphic is 10-bit 422. Is 6K anamorphic 10-bit or 8-bit?
The 6K anamorphic is 8-bit. So now I'm not entirely sure if the 4K anamorphic is 10-bit 422. I think that might be a firmware update which is coming.
Okay.
But the 4K anamorphic I think I believe it might be 422 8-bit, not 10-bit. But I can go back and have a look at that slide a bit later, but it's certainly, the 6K mode will be 8-bit. That's just too much data to record if it was 10-bit.
Okay. And Graham wants to know, is it the best SLR camera on the market for recording video?
I think it would be very, very hard to argue that it isn't. With internal stabilization, 422 10-bit recording, the full-size HDMI, any one of those features puts it in a league above what else is out there in the market. But add them all together and you've got quite an incredible piece of kit for what's going to cost, about £1,500 plus VAT.
Sure. Okay. Steve wants to know, are there any lenses you'd recommend for this particular class?
Well, as I've said, if you're looking at anamorphic, the SLR Magic ones, I am biased, but do make a fantastic 2x anamorphic conversion lens. And they make a set of 3. There's a 35, a 50 and a 70 mil. So that's a great set to start playing with, but they are a couple of £1,000 a pop. Because the Micro Four Thirds is a smaller sensor than you get with full frame, obviously, it's a little harder to get shallow depth of field, but some of the SLR Magic lenses and Voigtlander lenses, which go down to f.95 or t.95, can give you incredibly shallow depth of field. And so if you're looking for that shallow depth of field look, you can get it with spades by using a 0.95 lens, and there's a very well priced, it's about £400 for a 50 mil, for a 25 mil 0.95 SLR Magic lens. If you want the autofocus and the image stabilization, then you're looking at the Lumix lenses, and I think the pick of the bunch are the new 12 to 60 Leica from Panasonic, which is a 2.8 fast, but it ramps to f4 when it's at 60 mil. And also another favorite is the 12 to 60 2.8 constant lens. And those two both have image stabilization, which will work in this dual mode and fast, really high quality sharp glass.
Okay. Sorry, any two...
How does it work with the Metabones?
All right, yes. Metabones.
I did try this, and it did appear to crop, because that lens, if that's the Sigma I'm thinking of, then it's a Super 35 sensor coverage, not a full frame. So at 18 there was a tiny bit of vignetting when we used the 0.64 speed booster, but we didn't have the problem as soon as you went to about 20 mil. But it was only a tiny bit of vignetting. I'd almost put up with it. Didn't try it with the 0.71 speed booster, but I'd imagine that vignetting would go away. Yes, it should work. With the beta, I've got a pre-production camera with beta firmware. With the first beta firmware, when I did my testing, it was crashing every time you touched the zoom on a zoom lens. It crashed the camera. This is because it's a third-party adapter on a beta pre-production camera. But with the second firmware I've got now, I don't get the crashing problem. So already we're at sort of 0.5 beta firmware at the moment. It's getting better and better. Any 2.5 crop guides on display for when you can shoot true anamorphic? I'm afraid not. No, not at present. Now I'm hoping when we get the anamorphic mode, I've actually asked the engineers for this. So when we get the full 6K anamorphic mode, to have that anamorphic monitoring as well. But at the moment that doesn't happen. So it's a good idea if you're shooting anamorphic to use an external monitor which has that capability.
Sure.
Will they crop the image? Will what crop the image? If you're talking about...
that was a speed booster.
Oh, right. Yes, it shouldn't. I mean, the whole idea of a speed booster means we can use that full frame glass on the Micro Four Thirds sensor. There's some question about how wide you can go with the 0.64 when you're using the image stabilization, because if the sensor moves a little bit, it could possibly move to the point where you might see the sensor going outside the image circle. However, I haven't seen that happen yet when I've been looking at a speed booster. It's worked absolutely fine with image stabilization on, but I think only time will tell. Can the noise reduction be shut down? Yes, you can turn the noise reduction off. Any plans for an AF200 would be amazing. It would be amazing. If there are plans, they haven't shared them with me. But yes, I'd love a AF200 style. If everybody, or the AF101 was a big favourite of mine, and getting this sort of image quality in a more traditional camcorder sized body with neutral density filters would be fantastic. But for now, we haven't got that, so just buy a GH5.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there now. As I said, thanks very much, and hope you'll join us again for another webinar. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.